we really have to think of like, who do I want to become, not just what outcome do I want to achieve.
Hey guys, thanks again for joining us on the First Optimal Podcast. Here with Lisa Franz. She is originally from Germany, but residing in Bolivia today. So excited to have her. Far distance for me here in Michigan is where I'm based out of, but we do travel a bit in the U.S. But wanted to have Lisa on. You know, she's master's in exercise science and nutrition. She also is a podcaster, a lot of great content, a lot of like applicable short form content that I think has some helpful tips for everybody out there viewing in today too. So we're going to get into all that fun stuff as well as more of Lisa's story. Obviously we do some research before, but it's always exciting to have a guest on with Lisa's knowledge and insights and kind of unpack that. So thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Joe. I'm really excited for this conversation today.
So we were talking a little bit beforehand, and you know, just at a high level, like for those out there, can you tell us a little bit about who is your, you know, general clientele you work with, and what does that entry point look like? Like, what does it look like when one kind of is, what type of client, I guess, is coming to you typically, and with what issues they're looking to address or goals they have?
Yeah, I guess I'll give you a little bit of a background on myself as well, because one sort of leads to the other. So I have always been active for most of my life. I always enjoyed being fit, and just really at some point got to the point where I thought, why don't I look like I'm working out? Like I'm spending like an hour in the gym every day, and I just like, I'm eating healthy, I'm eating quote unquote clean. Yes, sure, every now and then I have a cheat meal or cheat weekend, as I used to have them back then. But why don't I look like I work out? And I then put myself through various diets, whether it was low carb, low fat, paleo, zone, you name it. And I just always felt restricted. I felt like, why can't I enjoy my life? I like to travel. I like to be social. I like to go out. And at the same time, look the way that I want to look. Why do I have to pick one or the other? And then I thankfully found or learned about the concept of calorie balance, which in essence means, okay, technically we can eat whatever we want. Sure, most of it should be healthy, whole foods. But there's also nothing wrong with having a slice of bread from time to time, with having a piece of brownie, with incorporating a glass of wine if you choose to from time to time, as long as you are able to fit that into your calorie budget, and as long as you still make sure your protein is high enough, your fiber is high enough, and so on. And even though this sounds so simple, this was like eye-opening for me. I suddenly felt what I now refer to as food freedom, because it has truly allowed me, through just logic or through the physics of it, to see, right, I don't need to attribute any moral value to foods. There are no good foods and bad foods, so to speak. And I don't need to feel guilty if I have if I have rice, because I had all these, like, I had so many food rules for myself, Joe. It was like to the point where even if I had a piece of fruit, I would feel guilty because that's a carb. And so it was really quite limiting to that point. And so once I felt that freedom, I was like, I need to teach everybody about this, because I am certain I'm not the only one. So this is kind of the person that I'm speaking to these days, someone who's actually quite active, who actually loves to look after themselves, and they are quote unquote eating clean, taking supplements, following health promoting content online, but they really just think like, why don't I feel better? Why do I feel guilty about eating certain things, or after social engagements, or when I go on vacation and I come back and I feel gross about myself? And I want to teach people how we can have both, by simply learning more about what's actually in our food, what's actually what's actually my calorie requirement, what should be a proportion size for my activity level, and then simply with that knowledge and being able to manipulate your own body weight however you want. So my goal when I'm working with someone is not that they're coaching with me for the rest of their lives. Absolutely not. I want, when we're done coaching after a few months, that they're like, okay, I want to go through a muscle gaining phase in 3 years time. I know how to do that on my own. Or I want to go and lean out a little bit more. I know how to do that on my own. That is my goal, so that someone, through simply knowing about what their calorie requirement is and how to do all of that, and that they can navigate food for the rest of their lives on their own.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, because I think you said something really interesting there at the beginning, where you were talking about, and I'm reminded of, I certainly wouldn't say I had a healthy relationship with food when I was competing in physique sports, but I, knew what was going to fuel me to get ready. But I'll never forget because I remember dieting, and I would be going to, Easter family deal, Thanksgiving, whatever. And everyone would always say, can you have this? And I would say, I'm good. Like, I packed my meal. And then I'd say, but is this good? Is this bad? And it's this like inherent classification of food. And then even online, you see like, don't drink water, it's bad. You're like, what? Don't eat this, it's good. Don't do that. And it's like, there's even some funny parodies that I actually selfishly, or I will admit, I should say, I kind of want to shoot them, because I don't even know if people would like it, but I find it funny. Where the person's like spitting out the food, because like one of the educator influencers will pop up and say like, I hate oatmeal, and then they're eating oatmeal in the parody, and then it's like, I don't drink water, and they spit out their water, and it just goes through this thing. But I think
What
it's
you're saying, I have had so many people reach out to me, or initial client calls, where they're like, Lisa, I don't even know what to eat anymore. Like, literally, even as you mentioned, like down to the point of water, where it's like, you can't drink tap water. You can't drink this water. You can't, like, there's so much overthinking that at some point we're stressing ourselves out too much by overthinking that, than just being like, okay, let's strip it down to the basics. Like, let's focus on the big rocks here. We really don't need to worry about the water content so much if you're not even eating a sufficient amount of vegetables. Like, let's look at the big picture here. I'm a very big picture simplicity kind of person, because I think that's the best way we can be adherent when life gets busy, as it always does, or when it throws us curveballs, and there's no point of knowing what to do, only when the scenario is absolutely perfect. Like, so many people, of course, went completely down the drain during COVID, but other people used that time to work on their physique. And then as soon as the quote unquote normal life opened back up, they were lost, because they never learned how to navigate a meal out or a date night with their partner or anything like this. So, yeah.
And where does that first kind of aha moment about the good and bad food labeling? Like, was it when you're going through some of your, I know you have several nutrition certifications you went through, and, ongoing continuing education there. Was it like an aha moment there? Was it something prior to that? Like, when
Well,
did some of that pop up?
unfortunately not. That is kind of the sad aspect of it. So even though I have a bachelor's and master's degree, sure, during that time we learned like roughly like what's good for performance. And if someone is an athlete, they should probably have more carbs, or probably need more carbs. And yes, you should eat more vegetables and so on. But it was a lot more focused on, I guess, micronutrient intake, which I mean is very, very important. But nobody ever showed us like, hey, if you want to lose half a pound per week, this is how you create a calorie deficit. So actually my first professor at university, she was a very big low carb person. So of course I did low carb, and the next professor, she was low fat. And so at some point I was left basically eating protein and vegetables, and wondering why I was like ravenous on the weekends.
Yeah.
But yeah, I then at some point went through a CrossFit phase, and one athlete that I looked up to at the time, she put out a blog post, and that blog post was titled "Why or How Donuts Gave Me Abs and an 80 kg Snatch." And for those people listening who are not familiar with Olympic lifting, a snatch is a very challenging and heavy lift or exercise in Olympic lifting. And I was like, I want all three of these things. I want to have a donut, I want to have abs, and I want to be able to lift 80 kg. And so I read the article, and in this, basically, she also elaborated on her own journey to food freedom, where she had forced herself for so long through various meal plans, and always just trying to adhere, like to your point of like going to family gatherings with her own meal box and so on, because she simply didn't know. It was like that mindset of, you're on your plan or you're off the plan. There's nothing in between. And this whole all or nothing thinking is really something which I think is so detrimental to, yes,
Is
exactly,
this it?
to, that's 100% it. That was for me like the starting point where I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool. Yeah, I basically then thought like, okay, I want to show people that whole yo-yoing or that all or nothing thinking where you think I'm going to start back up on Monday or once I get back from vacation, that's exactly the culprit, because we're always going to gain more back. Our body wants us to gain more weight back if we are not diligent in a dieting phase or after a dieting phase. And that's one of the or two of the biggest mistakes. Either we go through a diet and at the end of the diet, we simply think, oh, I'm going to go back to my previous habits. I'm just going to eat intuitively. And your intuition is going to send you increased hunger signals because your body wants you to put on some extra cushion for the next hunger period or whatever you want to call it. Literally, your leptin is increased and your ghrelin, your satiation is decreased. So you are going to eat more if you just eat intuitively right after a diet. Or the other end of the spectrum, which I see, is where people just stay at that low calorie level forever and ever. And because they're so afraid of adding food back in, so their metabolism is taking a hit from that. Their hormones are taking a hit from that. And at some point, what used to be their calorie deficit now has become their maintenance calories.
Yeah.
And so, like, what's going to happen if you want to lose weight again at some point in the future? This is just not a good way. So we really need to, like, that phase after a diet is actually one of the most crucial points where people can benefit from coaching or some sort of guidance the most, because we need to learn how to strategically increase the food again, how to recuperate hormonal and metabolic health and all these sort of things. Otherwise, we are going to see longer term issues.
Yeah, no, and I'm curious, like when someone's coming to you, and I want to get into some more details and nuances, but I think just kind of broadly, if you had to pick one majority of the time, like what do you see most of, like, as being maybe the big obstacle that they're bringing to you? Is it, I guess I don't want to lead you on that. What is this an obstacle your clients when they're coming to you that you see that they struggle with at the beginning usually?
I would say just in general, having an overloaded plate, and I mean that metaphorically speaking, so too much stress, too many things going on, all in all, trying to like overcomplicating everything or just doing too many things, whether that is you're juggling work, kids, putting everybody else first but yourself, and then on top of that, forgetting to eat, undersleeping, not managing your stress well, even in the sense of mindset on like how you're responding to things and taking everything personal, or if we don't practice proper stress management, we all have poor coping techniques. Nobody is born with like, oh, I'm a Zen person no matter what comes at me. So I would say that that's probably the biggest point, because of course, if we're overly stressed, a few things happen. We tend to crave more sugary things, more carby things, more food in general, because it is a way to feel good in the moment and to help our body have more supply with more resources to deal with that stress. And then on top of that, of course, our body's cortisol is increased. So we're just holding on to body fat much more. And the body's thinking, I'm not going to let go of body fat in this time of danger. Why would I do that? That would be silly. My only job is to keep you alive. So really, those two things are often a big point. And it can mean numerous things. So we want to work on eating more in an undistracted way, eating more mindfully, even just eating slower, not just shoving something in while you're driving, while you're talking on the phone, and then you're like, oh, where did my food go? I didn't even realize I ate this and that. We want to actually take those 5 to 10 minutes. And I mean, that's not a lot to ask for, in my opinion, but it's something that we need to make a habit. And another thing is maybe establishing some habits that allow you to switch from I'm working, I'm stressed, to okay, now it's time to relax. Because especially if we're working from home, for example, there's often not a clear line between I'm working and I'm not. Or if we're working, then picking up the kids and then making dinner and so on, like where is that transition to now it's time to slow down. Now it's time to rest and digest. And then, of course, sleep being a really, really big one, where we're also seeing a lot of research on that come out now. Like if we're underslept, we're likely to eat more. Once again, like if we're eating, there's various studies that show that if we have the possibility to eat ad libitum, so basically you have access to however much food you like, and then if you haven't gotten enough sleep in that night, you just tend to want more. That's very, very clear. And on top of that, if we're in a weight loss phase and in a calorie deficit and we're not sleeping enough, the chances that the weight that you're losing comes from lean mass, so from muscle mass that we want to retain, is a lot higher than if we get full amount of sleep. So ideally, of course, in a weight loss phase, we want all of the weight that comes off to come from body fat. That's not always possible. Most of the time it's not. A little bit is always going to come from lean mass, but we want to keep that percentage as small as possible. So really dealing with various sources of stress. And that also means addressing, are you doing the right kind of exercise? Are you just doing high intensity training and adding even more stress to your body? What can we do? Maybe we switch one of those sessions for yoga. Maybe we just change your HIIT or CrossFit training or whatever to more strategic, just gym workouts that are not as stressful for your CNS. So there's so many aspects to that. But if I had to pick like one overarching theme, it really would be doing too many things at once.
So I'm curious too, I show up, I'm doing too much. I'm eating in the car, I'm not getting enough sleep. I'm putting my heart's been in the right place. I've been doing this for 10 years, right? I'm putting everyone in front of my needs, and I'm a little stubborn because I feel like I'm, doing what I should be doing. And I know we're painting with a broad brush. There's going to be some uniqueness to each situation, but what is like maybe one or two or three, however many practical steps you kind of help that person get out of their own way a little bit and start to be able to implement some of these strategies to help them with their overall health?
Again, I think simplicity in the small steps, even if they sometimes seem like they're not doing a whole lot, but I think that they go a really long way. So even if it's just, okay, can we shift your bedtime 10 minutes earlier? Is that possible for you? Are you able to like actually put your phone away when you're eating? I do think that those should be two priorities that just generally help one become more mindful. And then, okay, you've done that successfully for a week, for two. Can we build on that? Maybe looking at your workouts more specifically, even if you're super attached to, your high intensity classes because they make you feel good and we get all that adrenaline pumping. I think that's like one very paradoxical thing that I personally had to learn, because I too was like a very high intensity workout kind of person. And then someone said to me, Lisa, this is not the best way for you to achieve your physique and also to get your hormones leveled out and so on. And I was like, what are you talking about? This is like the best hour of my day. I hate my life otherwise. This is the best, the most fun I have all day. And now you're taking that away from me too. I think it took me probably up to 4, 5, 6 months to actually realize, okay, I don't need to feel beaten up after workout in order for it to be effective. I can have energy for the rest of my day when I'm done working out. That is insane. And I just learned through like seeing the results aesthetically and having better sleep and so on, that, okay, even though I feel good because of the adrenaline rush after my workout, it's like long-term, not necessarily the healthiest thing. So yeah, looking at the big rocks, as you said, depending on what each individual needs. But I think even if we're just doing small things at a time, like putting the phone away, like adding 10 minutes of sleep, maybe taking one workout out of the week and replacing that with something down regulatory, or even a few breathing practices throughout the day. Like let's take 3 to 5 deep breaths before we eat so that we can access that parasympathetic nervous system more and so on. Those things go a long way, even though they sound so benign.
Yeah. And so there's sounds like several what one may perceive to be little things, if you will, simple to implement, small commitment. How does that get implemented in someone's plan, or someone who's listening? How would they maybe first implement this? Is there a document of like their day and you list it in there? Is it a diary? Is it like, how do you implement that? Because I think all of it sounds great, right? And I'm sitting here going, well, yeah, I'll do it. And then we talk 2 weeks later and it's like, yeah, I forgot about all of it. Even though you're giving me three super simple things, like I'm not doing any of it. So how does it go from concept to practical application?
Yeah, you know what? I have numerous times thought or heard from other people, hey, you should have a step-by-step guide on like, this is step 1, this is step 10, and in week 1 you do this, and in week 10 you do that. And I've actually even trialed something like that, and you know what? It did not work at all because everybody is so different. So to the person listening, I would literally just ask you, can you think of the 3 biggest stressors in your life, or the 3 biggest thing where you're like, I logically know this, I'm just not taking action on it, and then put a hierarchy on that and just take a small piece of action on the first one that comes to mind, and then work on it. And really just like as simple as it is, like for someone who is maybe doing those high intensity workouts, if that is your thing, next week I encourage you to not right away after your workout jump into the car, pick up your kids or whatever is, go to work and so on. But just take 3 to 5 minutes where you just lay on the ground, or you take some deep breaths, or you do some foam rolling, and make that your one thing for the week. And then when you're consistent with that, you're like, okay, now I can address my distracted eating. What do? I take 3 to 5 deep breaths before I eat, and I put my phone away. I listen to a great podcast like this one here, for example. But otherwise, I'm not typing, I'm not scrolling, I'm not answering some messages, I'm just eating. Like more single tasking, to my whole theme here of simplicity and doing less rather than more. If we can all do more single tasking, which is what people nowadays call being more mindful or practicing mindfulness, I think we can all do the things that we do better and get more out of them than if we constantly do this multitasking. And I'll put my hand up, like, absolutely. I'm saying all these things from personal experience and personal struggles. And every now and then I catch myself slipping back into old habits as well, where you're like, Lisa, you shouldn't, on your daily walks, don't do texting. No wonder you have a stiff neck, because you're walking around with one hand up. Yeah. So stop it. That's not helping. Oh, okay. Right. I regularly have these conversations with myself.
I will say that was one, my wife and I, we started committing to daily walks, and she's okay. She'll be okay. But she recently just came down with a little short-term illness. So we missed it the last couple of days. But one time she gave me the old like side swipe, like, get off your phone. And I just glanced down, and it was past the time of our walk, and we were about to start the work day. And at first I was like, well, I mean, we're late and I got to answer this. And then I'm like, but ever since, I just don't do it. And it seems so, yeah, like so obvious, where you're like, yeah, big deal, but it compounds. Cause I think a lot of people forget about, there's actually a really good book out there called The Compound Effect. And it just talks about, in that book, he talks about, like, he has a thing called Big Mo, which is like momentum. And he talks about, those small compounded things. And he takes like 7 or 8 different things in life, marriage, financial, weight loss, a couple other business, a couple other things. And he extrapolates it throughout the book as like these tiny little differences over the course of a year, 5, 10, 15. And you're like, oh, that's how people do this, or you go to the 20-year, 20-year reunion, 5 pounds a year, right? That's 100 pounds. It's only 5 pounds a year. If you look at that in regards to the I mean, this, but the caloric amount of an overage, if you will, from activity level per day, extrapolate over a year, over, to be 5 pounds, then multiply it over 20 years, like, it's not a lot. It's not a lot. And I think conversely, it's the same the other way around. But then people, when they're starting at 100 pounds or 50 pounds of weight they want to lose, it's so overwhelming. But it's the old, I don't love this saying, but it's the old, like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, which I don't know people that eat elephants, so I don't know where that came from. But
I like it. But no, you're so right. Like, especially to the point of nutrition, that's exactly how great habits are built sustainably. And more than that, how we actually create a new identity, because that is something people don't think about when it comes to weight loss or health changes, how we actually need to step into a new identity and let go of at least parts of our old one. So let's just say you are having a glass of wine 4 to 5 nights a week just to calm down, like or to wind down after work, that might not seem like a big thing. And you might even say, hey, I fit that into my calorie budget, Lisa. I don't know what you're talking about. And I used to tolerate that just fine in my 30s and early 40s. Now I might be in menopause and you are, or going through the menopause transition, and you're telling me I should let go of this glass of wine. But if we even just strip that back to like, I'm only having that 3 times a week or 2 times a week or whatever. And then at some point you're like, oh no, I'm the person who doesn't habitually drink anymore. I only drink on special occasions. And that transfers over to, oh, I have that daily muffin or chocolate or whatever, and making that into something special, and then making that into the person who's known to make the better choices, to the person that's not overeating but eating in moderation. Like, we really have to think of like, who do I want to become, not just what outcome do I want to achieve, not just I want to lose 20 pounds, but like, what does the person that loses 20 pounds or weighs 20 pounds less, what does their daily life look like? What choices do they make on a regular basis? And like, to your point of the compounding effect, I just thought of like, if someone's currently putting in or having their lunch every day with 2 tablespoons of mayo, maybe tomorrow they're saying like, okay, I'm going to have only 1 tablespoon of mayo.
Right.
Then 2 weeks later, they're not having any mayo. Maybe they're replacing that with avocado. Then that transfers over. Okay, maybe I can look at my dinner too. Instead of using, I don't know, this really half a cup of whatever oil, I'm just going to use some spray and air fry it. And then it transfers into like, it compounds, as you're saying, and before you know it, you've cut your calories in half. Food still tastes amazing, but you found some other alternatives or made it lighter, and you're feeling great, and you're losing that weight almost seeming like effortlessly, as opposed to forcing yourself through some super restrictive diet like I did in the past, where you just think like, what's the point of living? I can't have this piece of cake or even a slice of bread anyway.
Now, I got a couple of follow-up questions, and then I want to get like, I'll keep them kind of broad, and I'd like to get a little deeper. But my first one is more just, would you say a higher percentage of your clients are women over men? Is it 50-50?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely. I would say like 70, maybe even 80% of my clients are women.
okay. And then we were talking a little bit before. So large percentage of US, right?
Yes.
Where, and where would you say, is it US, Europe, Canada kind of?
Mostly US, Canada as well, a few in the UAE, so sort of Dubai, that kind of area, and Europe as well. As I'm from Germany, I have a few German clients, a couple in Spain. So yeah, all over the place, really.
Yeah. And so my question is, and if we go with women first, I'm just wondering if there's any, again, we're talking more broadly here, but differences in the mindset when a woman comes to you and they're Canadian, US, UAE, etc., different parts of the world. Are you seeing differences? I guess would be my first question, and then I'll kind of get into my other questions on that.
In terms of mindset, that's an interesting question. I really like it, because yes, there is actually, and like, I don't want to offend anybody listening here at all, but I actually love working with people in the US or in Canada as well, because I have found that their people are most quote unquote coachable. So they
Okay.
want to learn, they want to be led, they're happy to take on new things, try out new things, but still they want to like understand and not just be told like, here, eat this without any reason or so. Whereas Germans, and I can say that because I'm German, we often think we know things better, or we already know things. So whenever I give someone like, hey, you should do this and that, and here's a study to back that up, they're like, oh, but I read this in a magazine and my friend said this and I've never done that. And you're like, oh, okay, I feel like I'm struggling. Why did you hire me? You don't even want to be led. And
Yes.
then sometimes in the Arabian countries, they're like, they have crazy days where they work, I don't know, 14 hours or so a day. So they're like, I just give me a meal plan. I don't even care. I don't want to understand. So actually, I love that sort of middle thing of like, I want to be led. I'm happy to do something new, even though it doesn't feel right at first. But please tell me why. And then it's going to stick more also, because yeah, to the point of education, you're not going to keep doing something if you don't understand why you're doing it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you walking us through that. As a follow-up to that, I'm curious, like from a stress standpoint, I guess I'll package two questions. You can answer both or maybe pick one whatever comes to mind. But if you take those three areas of the world, is there differences in women's uh, self view slash perception of stress, or their stress that they're putting on themselves? Like, I kind of think some of those maybe are combined together, maybe they're separate, but what is there any differences that come to mind there?
Again, a really great question. I love it. And here I would actually say that throughout those countries, or globally speaking, I have seen women have a lot more in common than differentiates them there.
Okay.
So naturally, just putting everybody else first, they come last, overloading their plate, so to speak, really running it or burning down the candle from both ends, so to speak. Where I see differences in helping the women cope better with stress, I guess, to an extent, is in Europe, just leading more active lifestyles from a baseline. So like walking to places more, cycling to work. On the weekend when we go out with the kids, we're gonna go hike in the mountains. And like that's, yes, I know people in the US do that too. I'm very generalizing here, but on average,
Yeah.
you know, like where it just, even where you live, how the city is laid out and so on, people are so much more active. And so even that, like if I'm cycling home from work, I'm gonna de-stress throughout those 15 minutes and breathe,
Right.
take fresh air, and it's very different than if you're stuck in traffic for 15 minutes. And people in Dubai or in the Arabian countries, they're also very much in their cars, very stressed. But where their culture also shines is they have a very communal life.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm a very individualistic person also, like I need my own freedom, but I think sometimes we, as in the Western world, we're almost too much in that extreme where we
Independent.
feel
Yeah.
like we need to battle through things on our own. We
Yeah.
don't ask for help. We don't come together as often to even just eat or share food and socialize. Whereas most of these clients in the Arabian countries, like their weekends, they're for family things. They're always like,
Yeah.
I'm not just talking like mom, dad, and kids. It's like
Yeah.
an uncle and the grandma and the grandma's cousin, and like they're all together. And of course there's also a lot more drama associated with that. Everything has always a pro and con, but I mean that's another stress outlet. That's another thing where you're like, okay, I can talk to someone about that. They also care, they also go through this. Whereas I feel like in the US or so, people often keep their issues or problems more to themselves, and oh, I can deal with this, no problem, I got this, no, I got this.
I've seen it a lot with anecdotal, of course, just my limited experiences. But growing up, I remember, I guess I would say, realizing I'm missing something. I couldn't really put my finger on it, but a lot of first generation uh, families to America where their kids were second generation. So they brought over the cultural norms as far as like they were, I'll never forget, like Italian, Polish, Greek, Arabian, I forget exactly where that was, where their family was from. But I remember like I'd like walk over there on a Saturday or Sunday. Hey, want to play football, whatever. And it's like, whoa, there's like 20 people here. It's like, what is going on? But to your point, I think it is a much, it's a good thing to try to have into your life as far as food, family, community, building that in, being more intentional, because a lot of our grit, our wiring is more I'm going to, and a lot of times, although there's some utility there and there's some empowerment there, it's also can be drowning out maybe those times we need the support, it kind of seems like, or the community aspect is just underutilized, or maybe just under focused, even if it's unintentional.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I really think it's unintentional, and even just the way that like our society is often laid out nowadays. And I guess to put a little bit of personal context into this, so as you mentioned, I am from Germany. I left Germany in 2009 and moved to New Zealand for about 10 years, and then 2019 decided to become a digital nomad and have been traveling around for the last 6 years. And that's amazing. I have consciously chosen this lifestyle. But with that, of course, also comes an aspect of even more increased isolation and loneliness. So the last 2, 3 years in particular, I have really made a conscious effort of like Lisa, I know you're a person who doesn't need a lot of social connection. Like, I'm very happy on my own, naturally speaking. But in the long run, those deeper connections that go beyond just a small talk or so, you don't have that. You don't have that support. So really now when I am out, I make the effort of like not putting in my headphones all the time when I'm at the gym. When I'm going to a cafe, I make the effort of speaking to someone, at least one person, and even if it's just a small compliment, and really like trying to work on relationships, because I think we're so aware of, okay, we need to work on our body, we need to put work into finances, we need to work on maybe our immediate family relations. But aside from that, I don't think people are so conscious of like, hey, I need to put effort into friendships, creating friendships, especially if we're moving to a new place. And so, yeah, it definitely is something I also personally have to cultivate more consciously.
No, it's a really good point, because as you were describing that, I was thinking about, there's a lot of things I'm not good at, but one of the things early on in my career, like professionally speaking, not now, but I was at a pretty big corporation, a lot of HR red tape, et cetera. But I was just blessed with the skill and figuring out I had a good skill at this, and probably got it from sports and like leadership. And so I was in a lot of management leadership roles. And one of the troubles with that is I struggled early on in my career with being vulnerable, being friends, making connections, because they also were reporting to me. So if they didn't do something, I had to be the disciplinarian. The hiring, firing person, not that we would jump to that, but still, if it came to that, it's so much harder. And I often struggled because I was unintentionally isolated. And conversely, later in my career, I realized, how do I make it not so serious? Still sometimes I have to protect myself from HR standpoint. Like, I just have to be mindful of the title, if you will, and how I act and behave. But then second to that, what's really cool now at this stage of my life, the last several years, some of my closest friends, I've either never met or never did anything that wasn't professional with them. Like, I have just phenomenal friends now that, like, we sponsor a certain event, and a couple of the guys that run it are just, we text, we talk all the time. Like,
Amazing.
we've never gotten together. Now at this point, we'll grab a meal and whatever, like after the events. But for a long time, it was all business, if you will, but finding the way to integrate that into building relationships, makes your world smaller, makes things move faster. And then also, if you know people's heart, I find I know I'm getting a little off topic, but you can kind of, when you know their heart, you give a little more grace, or you don't interpret things the wrong way, if you will,
Yeah,
especially
and I
early in
mean,
the
I can
relationship.
imagine that they're also very like-minded people if they are connected to you through events like this and so on. And often I think, or I at least in the past thought, like, I have to keep old friendships alive and rather focused on them. And the old friendships are great, but sometimes you also feel like you don't have anything in common with these people anymore, or they don't lift you up or push you, or maybe even hold you back from things like achieving your health goals, your nutrition. And that's exactly what I was alluding to earlier, also with the often we need to change our identity, or let go of some parts of our old identity, in the sense of, if you're a weekend drinker, or your friends go and binge eat or whatever every single Saturday night, or expect these huge cookouts, like, maybe how can we make that more healthy? How can we go to a park, throw around a ball, and just have a light picnic instead, and let that be okay? And if some people are not supporting you in that, or at least accepting you for that, not everybody needs to walk the walk with you, but at least be like, okay, and not keep pushing the food, keep pushing the alcohol on you, then maybe sometimes it's okay to not see these people for a while, or even just say, like, only if you want to go for a walk with me, sure. But if you just want to go have ice cream and whatever all the time, then no, I'm going to have to say no for the next few months at least. And we can talk after that.
Yeah, no, I'm curious, as you're describing, you have a really interesting view, I would imagine, because of your extensive credentials and education on the nutrition side, and then your travel. So you have extensive, real world firsthand experience with your travels. So it gets me curious on, if we pick on the West for a minute, because that's where most of our viewers are going to be. So we're going to pick on everybody. What are some cultural norms or differences you think that you see in other areas of the world that would really help those of us, let's say, more in the West, or, as far as the differences from a health standpoint, or to have some success? What are some things you see maybe? Do you see some differences there, and what would they be?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one thing I already alluded to, and that was just the general activity level, how it's just easier to
Yeah.
be active. I literally last year, or the last time I was in the US was actually earlier this year. I went to the gym and I wanted to go to Starbucks, which was like I literally could see it across the road, and I wanted to walk there. And I couldn't, because it was kind of like, it wasn't really a highway, but it was a very busy road. There was no sidewalk. And so I even
Oh,
typed it into Google Maps and it showed me like a 20-minute walk, like really difficult. And I'm like, I can see it. How can I not get there? So I had to drive over there from the gym to the Starbucks that I was able to see. And I was just shocked at the infrastructure. And I felt really, yeah, almost sorry, I guess, for people that want to be more active, because it is so easy or almost fun to build an activity into your daily life that way, rather than I'm going to have to walk on the treadmill for 30 minutes because
yeah, who
there's
wants
no
to do
other
that?
option, or there's no proper sidewalks or whatever it might be. So that's an unfortunate thing, but of course not something we can necessarily change immediately. One other thing that is very apparent, and I'm sure most listeners are quite aware of that, is simply portion size. It
Mm,
is, again, and it's something that is sad, because as a consumer, you don't want to leave half on your plate and you've already paid for that, and you just think, like, especially if you come from that old mentality, like I even was told that you need to eat everything that's on your
on your
plate,
plate.
otherwise
Yep.
the weather is going to be horrible tomorrow or whatever, the starving kids in Africa, what, blah blah.
Oh
And
yeah, we've heard it
yeah.
all. That's universal. It sounds like, because I heard that over here in
Oh,
Michigan, a
absolutely.
few
So,
thousand
so
miles away.
even
Same thing.
a- anywhere, really, basically anywhere, I think, else in the world, the portion sizes are simply smaller. So if you have a smaller plate, if you have less on your plate, you're automatically, like, you are going to eat less. I mean, what is the practical takeaway from that? Well, if you're eating out, I would say never get the upsize. Maybe even like get into the habit of sharing plates with your partner, at least between you and a child or something like that, or get into the habit of, I'm going to take half of that home anyway, sort of thing. And when you're cooking, and again, there are studies on this, if we're serving our food on smaller plates, we're going to eat less, because you're like, it's a lot harder to go back for
Yep.
seconds than it is to like just load up your plate with less food. So I would say, if you have huge plates, or maybe get used to eating off of lunch plates as opposed to a huge dinner plate or something like that. Like that honestly seems like a small thing, but it can make a big difference. Um, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, go ahead.
I was just going to add that when I look at Europe and comparing that to America, the first thing that pops into mind is just less processing and
Mm,
more home cooking and so on. And again, that's often something that we don't have a whole lot of control over. Like if we're going to the supermarket or we just want to buy bread, I think bread is a wonderful example, because a high quality bread, especially if it's sourdough bread or so, there's really nothing quote unquote bad about that. But then if we look at sliced white bread from Walmart or so, that lasts for 2 months on the shelf without going bad, it's like there's a whole bunch of crap in there that we probably shouldn't be having. And no wonder that people are developing food intolerances or anything like that. So I think less processing, more whole foods, or even more home cooked meals. Yes, that is changing nowadays also with things like DoorDash and so on coming over to Europe. But I remember
okay.
when I, like, maybe 15 years ago or so, we never really went through a drive-through when I was growing up, or if we ate out some restaurant meal, it was like a special thing. You put on some nice clothes, and then on a Sunday you went to a restaurant, and that was it. Otherwise, everything was prepared by my mom or by my grandma. And now, if we think about, like, I know many people, and maybe someone listening to this, and again, there's no judgment, but many people that almost only eat restaurant cooked food, or takeout or drive-through food, and there's generally much more oil, much more sugars, much more just additives and all these things than if we have full control over what's on our plate, and we can cook with less of these added things, and simply are not exposed to so many chemicals, etc. So yeah, I would say those are probably the main things that pop into mind.
Yeah, no, it is interesting because it's one of the things I was just glancing at when you were breaking that down, because I think it's more, at least Western, it's more prevalent where, when does the home cooking go away or start to decline is going to be when one of, generally speaking, more traditional, if you will, roles, when the woman is in the workforce. And those, it seemed that, over the last 10 to 15 years, especially if you compare like Europe to the US, that gap has closed a lot, where I think if I remember correctly, US was much higher before, where now it's within 5 or 6% of each other.
I believe that.
US is still higher, but um, yeah, I think that's a really big one. I'm curious too. Another one I wanted to ask about, and I haven't heard this in a long time, but I used to hear this. Is it the timing of their meals, like lunch and things of that nature, breaks? Is that different you see in different areas of the world, and giving people
Absolutely.
time
Also,
to eat and digest versus eating on the go? We talked about that earlier, eating in a car. Like what are some of the differences you see there?
yeah, absolutely. So here in South America, or I've lived in Bolivia and Colombia, Mexico, and so on, they almost always have the bigger meal of the day for lunch, which kind of seems weird to me. Also, I have to personally say, I'm in the middle of my workday. I don't want to take a huge 1 hour lunch break and then almost be in like a lunch coma for another hour and take a siesta there or so. But yeah, in Germany as well, like lunch is the main cooked meal, and then often dinner is rather light. It might just be like a sandwich or something like that, bit of fruit. Yeah, of course, not on the weekend. Speaking, that's a little bit different, but generally speaking, the lunch is like the bigger meal, breakfast and dinner lighter. But you do take more time, even if it's in the middle of the weekday. Like almost always, people, I think it is like in Germany, it's definitely a law. You have to take an hour of a lunch break. Here, I'm not entirely sure, but I would say that actually is definitely a contributing factor to a better calorie distribution throughout the day, because you're not so used to like, oh, I'm coming home ravenous, and anything
Yeah.
is that's in sight, I'm just going to shove into my mouth. Like one of the first things I often do with clients is like look at their meal frequency, and they might not even have a proper lunch, or any lunch at all, maybe just like a coffee and a muffin or something quick on the go, protein bar or so, and then they wonder why they can't quote unquote control themselves when they come home. So we often say like, hey, can we have a proper lunch? And I just mean like something that contains protein and vegetables. It doesn't need to be an hour of a break, but as I said earlier, like 10 minutes. And then also, can we add something in the afternoon? So maybe low-fat Greek yogurt with some fruit and a little bit of nuts or something like that. Or even if it's a protein bar, if you're on the go, at least you then don't come home with those super, super low blood sugar levels where you're just like cranky and annoyed at your kids, and like nobody can say anything that's right, and you are basically grabbing the frozen pizza because you can't be bothered to cook something. And I wanted to add that to the earlier point of like eating a lot of takeout food. I think that's also important for people to practice, that actually preparing meals at home can be just as quick, if not quicker, than sometimes like ordering something or going through the drive-through. It really doesn't have to be elaborate. I do think we often overcomplicate things when it comes to, oh, it needs to be the tastiest meals. It's absolutely fine if 3 to 4 nights of the week your meals are pretty plain, a protein like chicken, like fish, or if you're plant-based, tofu or whatever. Some vegetables, healthy carbs like potato or rice or some other grain, and then throw in some healthy fats like an avocado or whole eggs or something like that, and you have a meal. You can season with herbs, with spices, with low-calorie condiments like sriracha sauce or soy sauce or so. And it doesn't have to be something elaborate where you are in the kitchen for an hour with 20 different ingredients, cooking for your kids something separate, cooking for your husband something separate, making yourself a meal something separate. Why are we overcomplicating things? It really doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, no, I did want to go a little deeper on, one of the meals specifically and talking macronutrients, especially with a higher percentage of clients being women. I've often seen this and, through experience and or being cited is, and maybe you can answer, but what is the lowest macronutrient, of our three that you see women under consuming generally?
Yeah, generally, unfortunately, it is protein, and
Mhm.
not just for women. I do also think,
So men
even though
too.
men have a higher inclination of eating meat and enjoying meat and so on, nonetheless, of course, they have a higher requirement also. And so I would say protein, just on average, globally speaking, really protein is underconsumed. And with that come a lot of things. So if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, I don't want to put on a lot of muscle, I don't care for being super ripped or whatever, you do still want to eat enough protein because A, it's the most satiating macronutrient. B, it is good for all kind of connective tissue, not just muscle. It's going to help your hair, your skin, your joints, anything like that. It is linked with so many other things, such as even having less cravings or having less period symptoms if you are going through your cycle. It's also just the least likely to be stored as body fat, because protein, to break down protein into fat or make that into fats, is very, very, very unrealistic or very unlikely compared to having an excess in carbs and fats. And so if you're listening to this, and especially if you want to lose weight, it's also going to help us retain more of that lean body mass when you're going through that weight loss phase. So I would definitely say protein. And if you don't want to track your food with a food tracking app or anything like that, which I do think everybody should do at least for a short amount of time, because as I mentioned, it's very eye-opening. Even just thinking of it in the sense of like, okay, I'm looking at my palm or I'm looking at a plate, can I include a palm-sized portion of a lean protein source? So something like chicken breast, like white fish, like low-fat Greek yogurt, like egg whites, or something like that, into each one of my three main meals minimum, and ideally also into a snack if I have a snack. And so I think that's a really good starting place. And then if we want to build on that in the sense of how I lay out the rest of my plate, ideally we want to see half of the plate, the other half, or one half of the plate being vegetables or fruit or something. Like if we're talking about breakfast, people always get confused about this, but even in breakfast, if we can have some vegetables in there, with your eggs or egg whites, or in your low-fat Greek yogurt, if you have some wonderful fruit in there, that's a great rule. Where we can also get enough fiber in, because fiber, after protein, in my opinion, being the next important thing to look
Yeah,
at, it's just so
the lowest.
satiating. It's not just for, oh, I'm pooping just fine, I don't need to eat more fiber. No, there are so many other things associated with consuming enough fiber. So we want to get more of those vegetables, not to speak of the micronutrients like vitamin C and all the others that come with fruit and more vegetables as well. So I would say that. And then, we have a quarter of the plate full with protein. We have half the plate full with fruit or vegetables. So that leaves another quarter of the plate for some healthy carbs, maybe a little bit of fat. If we think of fats more in the sense of something smaller, like a thumb-sized portion, a slice of nut butter, if you put that on your Greek yogurt, or some avocado or the egg yolk or so, that would count towards that as well. And so we've built a super easy, colorful, nice plate that should be satiating, that should keep you going. And of course, that needs to be individualized. If someone's very active, we're going to have more carbs. If someone's completely sedentary, not doing anything, we might take out the simple carbs completely throughout the day, maybe just in your dinner so that you can sleep and relax better. But that's kind of where the individualization comes in.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I want to ask you a couple follow-up questions about some tips, if you will, but I thought I would share a couple that come to mind when you were talking, because I've seen this a lot, even with my daughters, where they're like, Dad, I don't want to eat your, protein. I don't want, and something as simple as like, well, I don't like egg whites. I don't like the consistency of it. Well, you can take, I mean, I've seen with some plans where it's as high as like 5 or 6 egg whites with one yolk, but even if that's too much, like start with 1 and 1. Like,
Yeah.
in other words, 2 egg whites, 1 whole egg. So I'm getting rough and tough, what would that be? 7 plus almost about 14 grams, maybe into 3 of those. I'm rounding up a little bit, but you could get more. And this, if you're doing scrambled eggs, just blend those up and you're not really going to taste a huge difference. I was just thinking of that. And then a lot of people get a little too heavy on the kick of, my opinion at least, but well, you don't need that much protein, it doesn't all convert to muscle. And I think what a lot of people forget is, as you were talking about, and I'll round up here, but the ability, a protein is just a really crappy carbohydrate when it comes to energy. So like, to convert it to energy, I'm going to round up a little bit because there's like 2 steps, but it's generally about 15% of the energy is burned to make it into the form that the body can use. So just for those out there, like I'm just high level, there's little nuances, but if I had 100 calories of carbs and 100 calories of protein, if you follow that rule, 85 calories is actually going to be what's left over once it's in an energy source, versus the carbs are going to be almost intact. And I use that conversely with athletes. I see a lot of athletes where they're going to lift and they're eating a protein bar. And I'm like, you just want a crappy carbohydrate that you're taking in to try to train, and your body's actually working on breaking it down, digesting it, instead of giving it in more of a form. And then we get into fluids and sodium and all that, but giving it more of a form to like, that's easily, used during the strength training routine or performance out, a performance based meal. Like, I'm eating this to perform better in a half hour, 90 minutes, whatever. But all that being said, one, I wonder if you have any comments on that. And then two, I was going to try to get into like some supplements maybe that you see that have utility to them.
Yeah, amazing. No, I love what you said, because that's obviously another benefit of protein that I didn't even mention earlier, which we often call the thermic effect of food. So
Right.
just even in order to be broken down, that's part of what makes up your energy, your total daily energy requirement, being like, how much energy does your body need in order to break down food? And breaking down protein is so much harder than breaking down the other 2 macronutrients or fiber, which is often impossible. So yes, I really like that point. And I also see that with people that are actually exercising a lot and almost afraid of utilizing the carbs as best as they could. So I truly like meal timing, or fine tuning meal timing, specifically when it comes to athletes, especially. I think that's really, really important. And then in terms of the follow-up question with supplements, I mean, a lot of people often even list whey protein as a supplement. I don't even count that usually as a supplement, because I think for me it's more like, okay, you have issues reaching your protein target through whole foods. We can use whey protein or any other kind of protein powder that you like. It's almost for me a whole food, because it is such high quality. It doesn't even need to be, in my opinion, considered as like, oh, I'm eating this as a supplement. So I am a big fan of, like, if you're struggling to, or especially with people that are intermittent fasting, I often see them really having a hard time reaching their protein goal. And so I often say, can we make that a modified intermittent fast? If you're saying like you're really not hungry in the morning, or you're just rushing around, can we at least have a protein shake in the morning, and then, or at some point throughout the AM before you have your proper first meal, and that way you're a lot more likely to reach your protein target. Or if you're like me and you travel a lot, especially for work or so, let's take some protein powder with us, because carbs and fats are always going to be easy to come by. But other things that, in my opinion, most people would really benefit from would be something like creatine. And again, this used to be looked at as something where we're just like, oh, if I want to put on muscle or if I want to perform, I'm taking creatine. Nobody else needs to take it. And there's more and more research coming out how that's really beneficial for just about anybody, because it also helps cognitive function, and it can help prevent Alzheimer's and dementia. It can really just in general make us feel more energized, because what creatine, and I'm specifically referring to creatine monohydrate, what creatine does is really just helps our cells shuffle energy back into the cells quicker. So our cells run off of an energy broken down called ATP, and the creatine basically helps this whole energy uptake or energy reuptake to happen faster. And that applies for our brain cells as well. So really, I think anybody can benefit from consuming 5 to 10 grams or so of creatine monohydrate on a daily basis. Now, when you're first starting with that, we're going to retain a little bit of water, but before, especially women listening to this are freaking out about that, that's actually the good water retention, because it's bringing water into the cell, not subcutaneously under the skin. So you're not going to feel super puffy. You might see the scale go up a pound or so, but this is actually good. It actually means your cells are getting saturated. So that would be like the first one I think everybody can benefit from. And then, of course, there are other things like magnesium that most people will benefit from, because I think something like 80% of the population is not getting it through their whole food intake. So 300 to 400 milligrams in the evening can even be helpful for sleep. It's going to help with nerve function, all that good stuff. Something else I really like for most people is omega-3, specifically DHA and EPA, because it's a great anti-inflammatory. It's great for heart health, great for cognitive function as well, and just in general helps us recuperate better, particularly if we're active or dealing with any kind of stress, which almost everybody is these days. And I guess what I would add to that list also would be a vitamin D3, K2, just because, again, like most people are not spending enough time outside. And of course, depending on where you live, especially if you're living in Canada, Northern Europe, or any other part of the world where it's more cloudy and you're just generally inside more, you're very, very likely not getting enough of that. And vitamin D is specifically involved in hormone production. So if you are struggling with hormonal health, going through menopause transition or low testosterone, whatever, look at your vitamin D. Ideally, of course, we want to look at all of that through the lens of blood work. But just generally speaking, we could probably say that 80, 90%, maybe even benefit from supplementing with that.
Yeah, I mean, the stats are out there to where I think you can catch a pretty large, on the one hand, you can catch a pretty large amount of the population with, hey, these 3 to 5 things we know generally 80% or more are deficient. And then we know that these 3 to 5 things are like your highest impact. And usually there's some overlap, right? But because I've often, I've been finding a lot of utility. I'm hearing from different people I interview and have these discussions with about a focus on like protein and fiber intake to start versus all the macros, because they're maybe getting a little too overwhelmed, and setting it a goal, like just like you would someone who's trying to run 10 miles, like we're going to run a mile for 2 weeks, and we're going to run a mile and a half for 2 weeks, and just, slowly building up to where instead of running some math and saying, oh, I need 150 grams a day or 130, whatever the number is, and saying, well, if I don't do that, I'm a failure. Like, well, how about you start at 80 and just add 5 a week, add none, add 5 every other week? I don't know. Like, what does that look like? I think that's where a coach comes in. But those two have been really on my mind lately, because I've been, doing some searches. Years ago, I got really into like some of the general, mainly in the US, CDC recommendations. I saw a stat where 97% of Americans did not meet the minimum CDC requirement for like activity and exercise. And it was just like, whoa, like that's like CDC is not athletic, not bodybuilding. Like we're talking just basic human health.
Yeah, I honestly think that's like 130 minutes of moderate activity or so per week. So yeah, that is shocking. That's not even like 20 minutes per day or so. That really is absolutely shocking. And I mean, to the point of norms and recommendations, like even there, most things, like when people go to the doctor and the doctor is like, oh no, it's all within ranges. Often these ranges are like for minimal requirements. They're not for optimal, and they're certainly not necessarily looked at like what is your baseline, like particularly when it comes to like hormones and so on. Oh, my testosterone is within levels, but I feel crap and blah 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 blah. Okay, much more important is probably where was it 10 years ago? Where was it 20 years? Unfortunately, we don't often don't have that data, but it's also like relevant to your own person. And particularly also when it comes to things like the vitamin D, it's within 40 ml or like whatever, it is within the ranges, but does that mean it's optimal? Definitely not. And I want to see my clients thrive. I don't just want to see them get by somehow. But yeah, I wanted to add to your point of the protein. I love that strategy of like just slowly increasing it. And again, I would really encourage anybody to just track their food intake for a little while with some kind of food tracking app, whether it's what they all basically do the same thing, whether it's MyFitnessPal, chronometer, my macros. I don't have a preference, but I'm saying that from personal experience, and of course from working with lots and lots of people, because for example, I used to think peanut butter is a great source of protein. Lo and behold, I then learned, okay, a tablespoon of peanut butter that's like 150 calories has like 4 grams of protein. How am I going to get to 120 with this? There's no way. So what is actually a good protein source? That's kind of the things that you learn. Again, if you're listening to this and like, oh crap, I thought that. I'm saying this because I have been there also. So really, by tracking your food, you kind of learn that. And if you then weigh out your food, even if it's just for a month or two, you learn how big should my chicken portion size be for lunch? How much nut butter can I put into my yogurt without it adding way too many calories? And so these are the things that we learn. But yeah, I really, really like the point of slowly increasing it, because it also allows your digestion to keep up with that, as opposed to from one day to the next doubling your protein intake and then wondering why you're bloated, because it is harder to digest. It just is, and that's actually a good thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're definitely spot on with that. And one of the other things you had some content on, and I'm wondering if you can unpack a little bit. And there's so much that we can get into, but I know I want to be mindful of your time here. Is you had some content around like picking a protein bar, for example, and I had one tip that I stole from someone that I'll wait to share it, that to see what you think about it. But I like simplicity. Like I like the easy stuff, even though we've been doing this forever, but we get busy, right? Like, yeah, we know a lot of it. We'll forget, we'll get busy, not completely forget, but it's nice to have little hacks. But I'm curious when you're picking, a protein bar or maybe even a powder, but how do you guide somebody on how to make that decision?
Yeah, I love that question, because I do always like to give practical tips. And unfortunately, marketing is so smart. And nowadays we see like high protein cereal, high protein bread. And then if you don't look at the nutrition label, it's like, okay, this has 7 grams of protein instead of the conventional 5. Does that mean it should have the protein label on it? Probably not. Unfortunately, the same is the case with even with protein bars, where it used to be a nut called a nut bar, and now they're like a protein bar, even though it has like still only 7 grams of protein or so. So generally speaking, I like to give the guideline of like probably minimal ingredients is overall better, because they're not going to put in a ton of fillers and so on. But okay, let's look at the calories. For most people, we don't want them to be exorbitant, because it shouldn't be a meal. It's a snack. A protein bar is a snack. It should just get you to your next meal. So I would say like 200 to 250 calories max is probably a good place to keep it. Then let's look at the protein content. That really should be the very next step, because is it a high fat bar or is it a high protein bar? That's often what we see too. So I like seeing at least 18 to 20 grams of protein in a bar minimum. And then automatically that means that the carbs and fats are not going to be super high, because we only have that 200 and 250 calorie limit. So that would really be the biggest thing to look at. I mean, we can probably stop right there, even though in my post, I know I went a little bit deeper, but I do think if you just look at calories, protein, bam, and keeping ingredients minimal, of course, like if we're wanting to be really great, it would be mostly natural ingredients. It would be, you have things like the RX bars, which, mind you, they do have only, I think, 15 grams of protein or so. You have the David bars, and so they have a little bit less other ingredients, such as palm oil or soy protein isolate and milk fillers and whatnot. We want to keep those minimal.
No, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I heard this, I don't know where I came across this before, but it's a pretty simple rule that I picked up along the way, where it was like a 10x rule. Like if there's 20 grams of protein in it, multiply by 10, so it's add a 0, 200 calories. It shouldn't exceed 200 calories. If it does, it's not a great protein source from that standpoint.
I like that. I've never
and
heard that.
if it's less, green light. If it's more, so you can do that with like comparing, peanut butter in your analogy earlier to chicken breast. It's going to be the same. When you look at the math, like, whoa, this has, I forgot what it was in one of the diagrams I looked at, but you could just simply do the math, and it was something like 30 grams of protein, and it was, I want to say, like 130 or 140 calories, versus like the peanut butter was something crazy like 800 calories to get to the same amount of protein. So if you move the zero over, right, you kind of do it. So that was like a simplicity thing
I
that
like it.
I literally have been tracking protein for years. I just heard it this year, where I was like, well, there you go. Because you're always trying to find, especially if someone's not coming from our space, and they need, in my opinion, need utility. They need simple applications to kind of start to get it, and then they'll figure it out. It's
Yes.
just kind of helping them get going, because that was another. I guess I'll pause there, because that was a big one. There's a couple others that you already mentioned, with like how to look at the food size, plate size. Another tip I heard a long time ago, which is socially awkward, I'm going to admit it, but is, if you like, after you order your food, if you were struggling with this when you eat out, you could request that they bring like your to-go thing with you. So before you even start eating, you already split that massive portion size. I personally like to do, and again, it's hard because we all want to pick at stuff, me included. I personally try to, when I order out, like, I'll separate, like, a visual, mental, like, separation before I start. Like, this is going to sit over here because I'm going to take that home. I don't always do it.
No, I think that's a good strategy. I generally, like, when eating out, I try to not have a lot of meals that are just completely mixed, like a stir fry or lasagna or whatever, where you have no idea how much of what. I think, something like a steak and baked potato and some vegetables, that's awesome, or grilled chicken and some rice and veggies or so. But I guess one hack while we were talking about eating out, which I like to do, is just simply either ordering the sauce on the side always, because like, especially with salads, you think, oh, I'm eating the salad, and then again, not noticing how they're like adding half a cup of whatever dressing, even if it's a quote unquote healthy dressing of balsamic, whatever, homemade, it's still a half a cup of oil. So order the dressing on the side. You can still put a tablespoon or so on top. You don't need to eat it completely without sauce, but I think that's a really big one. Or just being mindful of cheese that they put on top, and a ton of nuts. And so if we're a little bit more wary of those small added things, that really goes a long way.
And again, everyone can call me a weirdo, but I got another one for you because it came to mind. But like, I really enjoy Thai food, but one of the places I do mild light sauce, and they'll always douse it. So now I started, if I do a takeout, I don't do this, but if I'm in the restaurant, I ask for a second plate, because I'm like, well, at least I can, again, socially awkward, but whatever. Like, my wife's locked in, so she's got to deal with it. No, so at least I'll, slide it off. And I'm like, my goodness, like, I ordered low, and it's still just this thick amount. I like, even if it wasn't for the health and the calories and all that, I just genuinely don't like it. The taste, I'm like, I just don't like it. I don't like heavy sauces. I don't actually. I have one daughter that's like loves them, and another daughter like me that same way. And it's like, I like that. And you could, instead of taking a spoon for dressing, you can take a fork, right? Like, these little things that, like, your brain doesn't know the different. And when I used to diet, this is like for physique sports, like, you're basically starving. I would use smaller spoons and smaller bowls, as you mentioned. Like, I love smaller spoons because, man, my brain just, it helped register, and it helped those hunger, the side, the fullness kind of type feeling, and the hormones to start to produce.
No, I'm with you. It makes you eat slower.
Yes.
It makes you have more bites, so it makes it go a longer way. I think that those are some great strategies, or even like little quote unquote hacks, like eating with your non-dominant hand, because again, like, you're going to be slower with that, or putting your fork down between bites. That also, because often we're taking a bite, and while you're chewing, you're already loading up your plate with your fork with the next load, and you're not even registering how you're chewing at the moment. So it's just simply going back to the point of slowing down and being more mindful.
That's actually an interesting one, because we're gonna tell our youngest to do that, because she slams food, and we're always like, slow down. She's the one that give me a run for my money, because I'm definitely the one of the speed eaters in the house. But But no, that's a good one, setting it down, because you have to be mindful of it. You have to be conscious about doing that. And another one that now is just a staple in our family. We all of us do this. I like it. But at first, years ago, I started doing it more for the fullness. Was I would always order water, and then whatever other drink I was going to have, if I was going to have like, a Diet Pop or a whatever, fill in the blank, I'd always get water and drink that first. And now I've kind of gotten to the point where I just enjoy water more with food. Like I'm not having food, I like other flavors and stuff like that. I definitely enjoy my flavors, but sometimes just the water. But I think a lot of people, if you like, a lot of what we're saying is not that complicated when you understand biology and what turns on some of these signaling hormones to say, oh, I'm starting to get full. I don't need to eat as much. But if you start it with, this giant, tasty, loaded with a bunch of goodies in it type bite is your first bite, by the time those hormones kick in, you've already overeated by 500,000 calories. So just massively overeating in these sittings. But
yeah, no, that's a really big one. I think that can be another quote unquote hack or takeaway from this, that what we eat first, like especially if we're thinking about breakfast or like to the point of like going out for dinner, they're very smart. They put out the bread first. So if you eat those high glycemic pure carbs, I call them naked carbs, without anything else, maybe a little bit of oil on there or whatever, but you're going to eat way more than if you start your day with protein, start the meal with protein and fiber. So even just, I'm not saying like don't have the bread, but wait until your meal comes, have a few bites of your chicken and your veggies first, and then you're actually going to eat less of the bread than if you're just snacking on the bread until the food actually comes. And same thing with your breakfast. If you're breaking your fast with, even if it's something healthy like a banana and you don't have anything, you're going to have more of an energy crash or more hunger later on in the day than if you had a protein shake and then some fruit later on or so. So the sequence does actually matter.
yeah, no, for sure. I wanted to just hit maybe one more thing, because I want to be mindful of your time here, but I was curious to, probably should ask this question earlier, but I got in the weeds. I got excited with some other topics, and mainly the travel, I think, threw me off. I was like, ooh, someone I can ask some other cultural questions to. It's been a while since I had a guest that had that I can ask that. I think it's been about 6 months, but I'm curious, myths, like what is, maybe one or two of the top myths that you just wish would die and go away? Like people bring to you these health myths or things that just flat out aren't true. Like what does anything come to mind when I ask you that question?
The first thing that came to mind really was intermittent fasting, because I have for a long time, the trend is kind of dying down a little bit, but there was a while where it's like, this is the bee's knees, everybody needs to intermittent fast. And I think like, especially for some people, particularly women actually, it tends to, not always, but it tends to be, it can actually be harmful in the sense that it's not beneficial for your hormones. You might add more stress to your body that way. You might be more ravenous later on and actually eat more. But in the end, it really just comes down to daily calories. So why are we stressing or trying to force ourselves into something if you're the person that gets up in the morning, really isn't hungry, and gets in all their protein and so on later on in the day? That's cool. Do the intermittent fasting. If you're a person who's like forcing themselves to do intermittent fasting, even though you're almost shaky and you can't focus, don't do it. The other thing, obviously, carbs. Also, I hear the same thing or have heard the same thing. Like carbs are inherently fatting. You can't have carbs. You need to cut carbs in order to lose weight. Same thing. In the end, it comes down to total daily calories. Do whatever you can stick with the best and whatever feels easiest for you. If you're someone who loves carbs, why cut out all the carbs? Like I was miserable when I thought I wasn't allowed to have fruit or rice or bread. My body runs really well on carbs. I love it. Not saying I don't have any healthy fats, but I'm definitely more carb inclined than not. And likewise, if you're someone who's like, I love a ton of salmon, I really couldn't care less about carbs, then, base your food more towards that. So it's really about finding what works for you. Those are probably the two biggest ones that come to mind.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Well, We're going to have all this in the show notes and all the details where people can find you, but I wanted to pull up a few things here just to kind of show the other audience out there some of your resources, and then we can wrap with where they can find you outside of where I'm pointing out here, obviously. But so yeah, nutrition, coaching, and life on Instagram. If people want to go to your link tree, you have a bunch of great resources here. So we're looking at you know, you have some recipes, a training app, obviously podcast, or not obviously, but a podcast as well, and website, and different options there, which is pretty cool to see if people can unpack and go more in depth. But with that, is there any other offerings you have in the works, or what other platforms are you pretty active on that people could try to engage with you on?
Well, first of all, also, Joe, thank you so much for having me on. This has been a really great conversation. I do hope we added some value to the listeners. And if you're listening to this and you enjoyed this conversation, just feel free to drop me a line also, even just saying like, hey, I listened to you and Joe, and if you have constructive feedback, that's always great too. But of course, anything else you took away from this. I'm also active on YouTube, basically put my podcast on there as well, have some additional things or sometimes training videos or something like that on there as well. But apart from that, Instagram is really my main platform. I'm on LinkedIn also. But yeah, I would say Instagram or the website for some of the freebies. Like we have a 7 steps to healthy hormones or crush your limiting beliefs worksheet or recipes, anything like that. Just go and take a look.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much again, Lisa, for joining us. There's definitely a lot we unpacked in this episode, and thank you everybody for listening in. And be sure to check out Lisa and her services, her guides, her podcasts. A lot of great information out there. Additionally, to be sure to engage with our content. So we're going to have some short form content we'll put out there, but also the podcast itself. If you're listening and you have questions, please comment or reach out. If we can answer it, we'll do the best we can. But if you're looking specific for a question with Lisa, we'll gladly connect you with her and get the answer to that. So thanks again, Lisa, for joining us. Really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for tuning in to the First Optimal podcast. We'll see you.